Okay.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Arnis Luks here at the Crossroads, and I would like to again welcome Professor Alan Moran. Welcome, Alan.
Hi, Arnie. Good to see you.
No worries. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to cut across. Last week we spoke about Murray-Darling Basin Plan and power generation, and I want to essentially just build the basis of the discussion today. So first of all, I just want to look at this. This is actually a copy of our Constitution, and it's section 100 in regard to areas that the Commonwealth shall not go and nor abridge the right to use water. The Commonwealth shall not, by any law, regulation of trade or commerce, abridge the right of a state or of the residents therein to the reasonable use of the waters of rivers for conservation or irrigation. I think that's a really, really important document, and I want to just keep going while we're at it. The Murray-Darling Basin Authority, the Water Act from 2007, that was under a Liberal government, Malcolm Turnbull being the minister responsible. And just to continue to lay the groundwork, I happened to come across these videos made in 2014, Muddied Waters. And in this Muddied Waters, there is a person of interest, and that is this Professor John Briscoe. And in his discussion, of the actual Act of 2007. And in the summary, he's actually in the very end of the document, he's more or less saying that the Water Act was founded on a political deception, and that original sin is responsible for most of the detour on which Australia water management now finds itself. And so he's making reference to the unpredictability as if we reverse out of this situation. And I certainly recognise that and see it as that whichever way forward, if there is a way forward, we need to take into account that we need to manage supply so that Australia's security is ensured. Professor, your thoughts?
Well, I think I'm very impressed by Briscoe's work on this. He essentially what's happened with the Murray-Darling is we tamed the river over the century before the turn of this century.
Hmm.
Uh, we allocated the rights to waters. We made some mistakes in doing so. One of the key ones I think that Briscoe alludes to is that we put these barrages at the end to create an artificial freshwater lake
Hmm.
from one which had been at most brackish, perhaps just salty, at the end there, and that was a waste of water. Uh, this was compounded in the years of this century, since the 2007 Act, and even before actually, by reallocation of water rights back from farmers or productive users, the irrigators, to quote the environmental unquote uses.
Hmm.
And the culmination of that was actually under the Labour government, but it was consistent with the Turnbull plan,
Hmm.
uh, whereby something like 20% of the water was taken from the farmers and allocated to environmental concerns along the river, sometimes with quite disastrous consequences.
Mm.
There's massive fish deaths, etc., as a result of the poor management of this.
Hmm.
So we hit a crossroads, if you like, in the turn of the century, when we could have said, okay, we've used this water quite productively. We've created a very fertile area of Australia for food production from what was semi-desert.
Hmm.
We've done so with quite amazing engineering feats, beginning well, not beginning with, but culminating in the uh, snowy direction of
Yep.
waters.
Yep.
Um, we could have moved further and said, listen, we've got a problem here because we're allocating this water. We've created this unnatural series of lakes, and that itself is using a colossal amount of water to do so. We really ought to move the barrage further upstream, and then we will have more water to be used for productive purposes. But we said the opposite. We
hmm
said we're going to keep that in place.
hmm
It's always a mistake, and we're going to compound that mistake by taking more water off irrigators and using it for these um, environmental purposes, which are faux environmental purposes. There's no reason why we need to do them.
Yeah, no, I found that fascinating watching those videos, the three videos, Muddied Waters, in
Hmm.
that the lower lakes, they are actually tidal lagoons. And so the ocean comes in and goes. It's toing and froing all the time. And so it's actually dynamically flushing those lakes with brine, with salt water. So it's a mixture of salt water and fresh water, and that's just its natural situation and has been for eons. It has been since I guess the formation of Australia.
Yeah.
I found that discussion quite interesting, and of course um, there is a choke area in the river where it actually restricts the flow rates, and I noted that in those three videos. The
Hmm.
choke area. So if you actually exceed it, you cause flooding prematurely, and so a certain level you shouldn't actually even go near because it's just a complete waste of water. So I found the arguments quite interesting, and I guess the to me the other issue that I'd like to place on the table is something that Pauline Hanson has recently again brought up, and that's in regard to the Bradfield scheme, redirecting water that goes straight to the ocean, redirecting it inland so that it can actually sustain a, if you like, a higher flow rate of this upstream area of irrigation of the Murray-Darling. The 13 something billion dollars used to buy back the water, um, would it have been better spent using other options rather than just to shorten the price of water to force it up? Alan.
Yeah, there's no question about that. There's no question at all. The $13 billion was total waste. In fact, it had negative value.
hmm
Negative value. We basically done much to punish that area and to reduce its productivity as a result of that disastrous series of policy decisions. Now, the question is the Bradfield scheme or some variation of it a better use of the funding? Probably is better use of the funding, but does it make sense? I don't know. I think that it's one of these things that has been looked at over the last 60 years or more from time to time. People have looked at it in a hard-headed examination and said, well, it's not as easy as just turning the waters back and then watching them all flow down down the Murray or in areas of potential fertility. It's not as easy as that because it is very expensive. The point about it is that technology does develop, technology changes.
hmm
Uh, I confess I looked at this in some detail, but that would have been at least 20 years ago,
hmm
and at that stage it didn't seem to make sense to me. It was very expensive, but we have improvements in tunneling techniques, we have improvements in dam construction, we have a lot of improvements, so it would be worth looking at again. And I
Yeah.
think that's what we need to do, a cold hard look at it in terms of the economics, because we certainly don't want to build a white elephant
hmm
in here. But by the same token, we don't want to be dismissive of this because it no longer accords with the sort of fashionable green, natural sort of uh, philosophy, which
hmm
seems to be beguiling so many of our politicians.
Yeah. No, I think that's to me that's a very interesting comment back on that, Alan, and I certainly take it into account because my personal concern, having toured, I spent a lot of about 10 years riding across the Victorian High Country, and so I was in and out the Snowy scheme quite a bit. And I also went through Griffith this year and had a look at the Murrumbidgee irrigation area. And so I'm very aware, acutely aware, that it is arid country that has essentially been disciplined to
Mm.
become agricultural country. And it hasn't been easy. It's been hard. There were certain minerals that had to be added to the soil simply to be able to grow certain types of plants and things like that. And there's a lot of pain and suffering to get there, but they've got there. And to turn around and have water security threatened by this 2007 Act, to me is the biggest carnage that we could have done, not only to ourselves as the, if you like, the individuals, the farmers who were under such financial pressure, undue financial pressure, because of the exorbitant cost of water, but also the fact that our food security for the nation, this is vitally important, and it doesn't appear to be part of the equation. Alan.
Well, I think that's right. I'm not sure I'd be playing the food security for the nation uh, notion as strongly as you, because I think that the security is there. I mean, it's hard for us to do that much damage that our security in food stuff would be threatened. But certainly, our security in terms of an ability to productively use the soil in ways that we should be using it as a civilized nation, that is undermined by the disgraceful actions which governments have done
Hmm.
to reduce the amount of water which is available for productive purposes.
Mm.
Uh, if you cut the amount of water by 20%, then you're going to cut the amount of produce by 20%, which is what we've done. Now,
Hmm.
does that threaten the security or the food of Australia? Well, no, we've got a lot of food, but it does threaten the economic well-being of the nation, and it
Yeah.
certainly threatens the economic well-being of those people in that region
Hmm.
of the Murray-Darling who pioneered the area and converted the arid land into fertile land, and got a whole series of supply chains to produce the food and other raw materials that come from the irrigation system.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's again. Thank you for the comment. I I can't actually put my finger on it, but I recently read where I think it was in the media anyway, just recently, and that was that the pressure of water, the purchasing of water is so demanding now on the farmers that it's actually cheaper to import the food rather
Mm.
than produce it ourselves. That to me is the food security, and that is to me it's certainly a serious consideration. The other is that with the Snowy Mountain scheme, there is also power generation, and of course our power generation stability is absolutely vital. And it appears that if you like, the environment or water consideration is actually overbearing the power generation. I know that this is off in left field, but to me that's also an important subject to consider. Alan.
Well, this is it's a dual produce.
Mm,
It's water for irrigation, it's water for electricity, and I think as long as we have clear ownership rules, as long as we can have clear rights to water and to power set in place, then yeah, you'll have a system which trades off these two requirements
hmm.
in a way which is reasonably acceptable, and that's what we've had in the past. Um, Essentially, the Snowy was and probably still is more valuable as a swing electricity producer than it is for water.
Hmm.
You know, they're both important facets of it.
Hmm.
But the Snowy was used in our system which was basically a coal-based electricity system to actually as the swing producer for when to iron out supply and demand.
Hmm.
That actually has become even more important
Hmm.
now because we through a horrendous series of energy policies,
Hmm.
we've actually destroyed or partly destroyed already the reliable electricity system which we once had, which was coal based,
hmm.
and replaced it by a renewable electricity system, which A has to be heavily subsidized, and B is totally irregular,
Hmm.
therefore requires even more interventions. And we talked about big batteries in South Australia, and we have them in place. And we've talked about converting Snowy essentially into a kind of a battery
That's
by
right. Yeah.
storage
Hmm.
methodology.
Hmm.
And we actually have in both in terms of water usage and buying back water from farmers, and in terms of the electricity policy of subsidizing high cost and unreliable renewables, we've done a great disservice in both ways.
Hmm.
We have to find a new balance
Hmm.
between the electricity uses and the irrigation uses of the Snowy. But I'd be convinced. I would feel that we can get that balance right with the correct uh, property rights, etc. And essentially what's the Snowy releases water, has been releasing water with a priority in electricity because it earns more money that way.
Hmm.
Uh, and then we have the other 20 odd dams along the river there, which store it and do so in accordance with the requirements of the irrigators and other users.
Yeah, yeah. No, that to me, it's obviously a very, very complex and interrelated system, and
Hmm.
and so it's really not for us to. I say it not for me. It's not for me to determine what would be the best approach. I think it's up to scientists and engineers
Yeah,
to do it. But to me, the outworking of the policy, whether it's to do with the Renewable Energy Environmental Act or the Water Act, these things have profound ramifications to the end user and certainly to the primary producer. And
yeah.
so I guess you've got to ask the question is what is the purpose? What is the purpose of the policy? What is the intent behind the Water Act of 2007? In my view, it's achieved its purpose, and that is to shorten the supply of water, so to push up the price, and that it can be then be able, obviously exploited. Am I too harsh, Alan?
Uh, I don't know. You may be too harsh in terms of saying that was the purpose, but that's certainly been the effect. I
Yeah.
mean, I'm not sure that anybody was saying, "Okay, look, we got to raise the price of water to force agriculture." I mean, I don't think anybody was that callous, but certainly that they didn't care. The people who were promoting this, the various agitators who were promoting, it, didn't care that the farmers would be adversely affected,
Hmm.
uh, and pretended in marketing their solutions that they wouldn't be adversely affected. I mean, we have university professors saying, "Oh well, people will use the water more carefully, and therefore, you prevent evaporation and a whole lot of other things at low cost." Well, we can see now that is not possible because the cost of the water has risen fivefold. You
Yeah.
know, there are savings you can make, but the savings aren't that great.
Hmm.
And really, we've sabotaged uh, a system which was working tolerably well in the past and could
Hmm.
have been improved by moving policy in the direction opposite to the one we moved it
Yeah.
into.
Yeah. No, that's an interesting word, sabotage, because really that was what I was inferring to. And in regard to power generation, is it any different? Is it still a malevolent outcome of the act, the
Well,
Environmental Act?
the power generation itself is that is good. It's essentially a good system. We actually did divert some waters back through the Snowy through Victoria
Hmm.
for environmental purposes back in before the turn of this century, um, for no particularly good reason. But essentially, the Snowy is operating as a commercial undertaking. It's now getting owned by the Commonwealth, but
Hmm.
it was operated in a commercial sense, responding to the needs of electricity consumers uh, in terms of as they were sort of triggered by prices. So there was a shortage of coal-based electricity, then the price went up, and Snowy started spilling over and generating.
Hmm.
That evened out the price. It was a terrific system which
Hmm.
we uh, and we still have. But now in terms of getting rid of coal, we've created many more, much steeper mountains and much deeper valleys in the price of electricity,
Yeah.
and it's creating other opportunities, so it is said, to actually use Snowy in a different way as a pumped hydro system at a cost of maybe $10 billion,
Hmm.
which is a credible cost and very high cost, but one which is unnecessary, except in the context of the poor outcomes of energy policy, which have been created by government decisions.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's a valid point. That's right. I last week I had a link. I don't know if I showed it to you or the audience. It was a Hansard from Robert Menzies, 1947, as leader of the opposition, was responding to the Labor government's initiation of the Snowy Mountain hydroelectric scheme, as a federal act, and Robert Menzies' position was basically that it was a very loose term of the federal government to actually get involved in something that was clearly not part or was actually disallowed in the Constitution. Your thoughts on not only the Snowies but also the Murray-Darling at the moment and electricity, Alan?
Well, this is all to do with the sort of imperialism of the federal government.
Hmm.
In a whole host of areas, they can usually find some reason, if foreign affairs powers or
Hmm.
companies powers or whatever else can override aspects of the Constitution, Section 100, talking about there,
Yeah.
and they did so in that event. It was probably always going to be necessary to have a cooperative system because there are 3 or 4 states involved, and there is a sort of a possibility of a federal involvement anyway.
Hmm.
But there was a cooperative system has been applied from the Murray-Darling
Hmm.
since 1901,
That's right. Yeah.
well before the feds got themselves involved in any sense. Because and the system was based on what are the rights,
Hmm.
what has been established in terms of the water usages from the headwaters down to the estuary,
Hmm.
and who owns it, which state own which waters, and so they're parceled up in that way. The same situation. This is not unique to
No.
Australia. The same situation happens in the United States with the Californian and other West Coast irrigation systems.
Hmm.
Same situation happens in Europe.
Hmm.
Any system where rivers run through different jurisdictions,
Hmm.
uh, rights have to be established as to who owns what, and they are in the end. They are in some way or other, or you go to war, war with and seize the rights. But basically, they're usually done through peaceful means.
Yeah, that's right. I recently read where there was pressure being put on Vietnam from waters that were travelling through other nations upstream of Vietnam,
Yeah.
and it certainly was able to squeeze them into duress. So I think to me it's very important because I guess it's, if you like, it's the exertion of power. And I know that I've read recently, at least touched on, a book by Jeffrey Dirk Walker. It was in regard to federalism.
Hmm.
Federalism, and I'm going to put it up on our website so that others can read about it. But it's the unique position Australia finds itself in that we've got state governments and a federal government, but that the federal government has limited powers, and the argument always was limited powers, and that was for the argument, of course, about the establishment of the States House, the Senate. It was actually restricting the powers of the federal government. Certainly 1901 and the constitutional conventions discussed these things at great length and only came into agreement based on the limitation of federal government. And of course, now what we're seeing is the undoing, the deconstructing of our constitution. Your thoughts, Alan?
Oh, I think that's quite right. That's certainly been the case. I don't know what we do about it. I mean, it's the founding fathers never really thought that there'd be a situation where the federal government would contrive means by which it takes over policy
Hmm.
through what was then, corporations, power over corporations, which weren't as important then as they are now, or the foreign affairs power, which nobody thought was going to be that big. But as soon as we sign, any convention on birds and Ramsar convention and things like that, the federal government then starts taking control,
Hmm.
and it's not been a happy outcome in terms of either electricity or in terms of water.
Yeah, no, that to me is an excellent summary, Alan. As the more we see power being centralised within the, if you like, the hands of um, the powers that be, either it's federal government or the power behind the federal government, whether it's banks or United Nations or world government, whatever you want to call it, this power over and above our government. But the more power that goes there, the less, of course, the less effect, the less representation. And I'm going to place a maverick thought on the table, Alan, without warning. So hold your breath. Um, C.H. Douglas proposed. He proposed economic democracy in the sense of distribution of the productive capacity of the nation in a fashion so that each person could use their financial vote similar to, if you like, train tickets for running a train system. And I'm not going to go into depth with it now, but I would like to give our audience a heads up that I think it's a very good, to me, leading subject from where we're heading with this Murray-Darling Basin. So I'm not going to leave you out on a lurch and expect you to respond to that, Alan, but I did want to give you a heads up that, to me, what we're looking at is we're looking at the tyranny of political power being exercised over economics. And in order to respond to that, in my view, the answer is to actually distribute the power that economics is now yielding, is now producing. It is a huge power. It's unprecedented in the sense of the history of the world, where so much economic power is in the hands of so few corporations. Your thoughts, Alan?
Well, I'm not sure that it's unprecedented in the history of the world. Um, sure, the power is in corporations, but shareholders own the corporations. I mean, there are rich people. I don't know that there are the rich in terms of their share of the aggregate wealth is any higher now. In fact, it's probably somewhat lower. I know there are colossally rich people now, of course, around the world. Um, I'm all in favor of the power being able to be used by people who've got money. If you've got money, you can decide how you spend it, and that then starts allocating, determining the proliferation of goods, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a sound system of capitalism. It's a system which has created the wealth of the world.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it really only works. It only works as long as you have the politics very carefully constrained and holding the ring, not trying to actually widen the ring or change the ring or change its shape or whatever else.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the delinquencies of the politics that we've seen over the past 50 years or more
Mm-hmm.
is the increase in the influence of the political decisions overriding economic decisions, and of course that influence was particularly demonstrated in the communist system, and actually imploded as a result of that. But we've seen it. We see it in throughout the Western type democracies, including in Australia. We've been talking about that ourselves
Mm-hmm.
recent years, recent times, that nobody would have envisaged uh, the possibility that the federal government would start changing the rules in terms of the river systems and buying up farmers' properties so that their water would be used to water trees and not to water crops.
Mm. That's an interesting summary, Alan. And in this instance, I've got another point of view, but I'm okay with that because I think that to me just adds a bit more flavour to our discussions. So I'd like to thank you for today. It's been a beaut forum. We've covered some good ground, and I look forward to our next meeting.
Terrific, Arnis. Yep. Okay.
Good on you. Thanks very much. Cheers.
Thanks.
Thanks, ladies.